"Whoever makes my son speak will marry me," said the millionaire. Then the maid walked in. Camera flashes erupted like lightning. The chaotic noise of dozens of reporters filled the press hall of one of New York's most luxurious hotels. In the middle of that storm stood Ethan Caldwell, a wealthy real estate mogul. His eyes were sunken with exhaustion, his graying hair disheveled from sleepless nights. 6 months ago, he lost the love of his life. Since that day, his world had never been the same. Ethan gripped the microphone, his voice trembling yet resolute. "I will marry whoever can make my son speak again." The words landed like a bomb. Reporters shouted all at once, microphones thrust forward. Some were stunned, others sneered, assuming it was nothing more than a publicity stunt. But Ethan was not joking. His tone cracked, weighed down by despair. "My son, John, is 5 years old. Since his mother's death, he hasn't spoken a single word. I've sought every doctor, every therapy. Nothing has worked. This is my last resort. I will give away half of my fortune as long as someone can make him speak once more." When the last camera flash faded and the murmurs of the press began to die down, Ethan turned from the podium. His body was rigid, his steps heavy, as though he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. At 42, Ethan Caldwell was once the man New York admired. He owned towers that pierced the skyline, million-dollar estates, his name synonymous with success and power. But none of it mattered anymore. Since the day Emma, his beloved wife, died of a rare heart condition, Ethan had become little more than an empty shell. In the penthouse overlooking Central Park, a place once filled with laughter, silence now pressed against every wall. The long dining table, meant for family gatherings, had only 2 seats occupied: Ethan and his little boy, John. But dinners ended in suffocating quiet. John sat there, eyes vacant, lips sealed, food untouched. No matter how Ethan tried to smile, to start a conversation, the only response he received was heartbreaking silence. He had tried everything. He had flown in the best doctors from Boston to Los Angeles, spending hundreds of thousands on psychological therapies. He turned to alternatives: music, hypnosis, animal therapy. He bought a small piano, hoping his son might find a voice in melody. But John only touched the keys lightly, then pulled his hand away. He hired child communication experts, but the boy showed no reaction. Every door slammed shut before him. There were nights when Ethan sat alone in his office, a glass of whiskey before him, and a photo of Emma holding John at the beach. The echo of their laughter stabbed deeper with every memory. He asked himself, had he already broken his promise? On her deathbed, Emma had made him swear to protect and care for John with everything he had. Yet here he was, the owner of an empire, utterly powerless against his son's silence. Money, fame, influence, all meaningless when he could not hear that tender voice again. That was why his public declaration was not a stunt, nor a reckless whim. It was the final cry of a desperate father. Ethan knew charlatans would come, false experts eager to exploit his grief. But he had no other choice. All he wanted was one thing: to hear John call him Dad once more, to believe their family was not completely lost. When he arrived home, he went straight to his son's room. John was sitting on the carpet, lining up his small toy cars in a perfect row. The boy didn't look up when his father entered. "Hello, son," Ethan said softly, lowering himself beside him. John kept arranging the cars as if he were alone in the room. "I did something today. You may not like it, but it's to help you. I just want to hear your voice again. I just want you to come back to me." The boy froze for a second, his tiny fingers suspended in midair. For a fleeting moment, Ethan felt a painful spark of hope. But then John simply picked up another car and placed it in line, his face expressionless. After putting his son to bed, Ethan went to his study and poured himself a full glass of whiskey. The lights of New York blazed through the panoramic windows. His phone displayed 57 missed calls and over 100 messages. The news had already exploded. In another corner of New York City, as autumn rain drizzled over the crowded streets, Lena Alvarez hurried beneath a worn-out umbrella. On her shoulder hung a heavy canvas bag stuffed with cleaning supplies. To strangers, she was just another woman with a janitorial job. But few knew that 5 years earlier, Lena had lived a completely different life. Back then, she was a teacher of American Sign Language, ASL, working in schools, conferences, and medical centers. She helped deaf children find their own voices, connecting families through hands that could tell stories. Lena loved that work with all her heart. Life was simple but full of joy with her daughter Isabella, whose radiant smile and endless curiosity lit up every room. Then came the cruel diagnosis that shattered everything. Isabella had a rare congenital heart condition. Their lives turned into endless hospital visits, medications, and towering medical bills. Lena left her job to care for her daughter full-time, selling off belongings, draining savings. And when Isabella was only 7, her small heart stopped beating. The modest funeral was paid with what remained after Lena sold nearly everything she owned. From that day forward, she was no longer a teacher, but a woman scrubbing floors to survive. That afternoon, passing by an electronics store, Lena stopped before a wall of televisions. A live broadcast replayed Ethan Caldwell's press conference. The headline scrolled beneath, "Millionaire offers marriage and half his fortune to whoever makes his son speak again." Lena's heart pounded. The image of the grieving man, and then, briefly, John's empty gaze filled the screen. She knew that look. She had seen it in Isabella's eyes, in those weak days when her daughter no longer had the strength to speak. That night, in her tiny suburban apartment, Lena pulled an old shoebox from under her bed. Inside were photos of Isabella, faded certificates, and a yellowed newspaper clipping from a medical conference where Lena had once interpreted. Among the list of speakers was Dr. Emma Caldwell, pediatric cardiologist, Ethan's late wife, John's mother. The coincidence made Lena tremble. It felt as though fate itself was nudging her toward a household where a boy was trapped in silence. And when she later saw a job posting for a housekeeper at the Caldwell penthouse, Lena sent in her application. She didn't mention her past, didn't say she had once been a teacher. To them, she was just another maid among dozens of applicants. But in her heart, a new purpose stirred: to save a child from the silence she had once been powerless to defeat. 2 weeks later, Lena received the call. She had been hired as a housekeeper at the Caldwell penthouse. On her first day, she stood before the towering glass building in Manhattan, her chest tight with a mix of nerves and anticipation. This was not just a job. To her, it felt like a door of destiny had opened. Greeting her in the staff lobby was Mrs. Harris, the family's longtime house manager. The elderly woman, silver-haired and stern-faced, spoke each word with sharp precision. "Mr. Caldwell demands absolute discretion. Nothing about life inside this home may leave these walls. No photos, no gossip. And most importantly, you're not to engage with young John in any way." Lena nodded, concealing the tremor in her chest. "I understand," she replied quietly. Mrs. Harris led her through the expansive corridors. The penthouse spanned 3 floors, boasting a pool, private gym, entertainment rooms. Everything gleamed with wealth and refinement. Yet as Lena stepped through room after room, a strange emptiness weighed on her. Everything was too perfect, too immaculate, like a showroom rather than a home. No family photos lined the walls, no child's drawings taped to the refrigerator, no toys scattered across the floor. The place was grand, but lifeless. Stopping before a door at the end of the second-floor hallway, Mrs. Harris lowered her voice. "This is John's room. You're only to clean it when the boy is not inside. Any interaction is strictly forbidden. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Lena answered, keeping her face composed. But deep inside, her heart stirred. The boy trapped in that silent world. He was the very reason she had come here. On her third day at work, Lena was dusting the vast living room when she suddenly felt eyes on her. She turned, and there in the doorway stood John. He wore superhero pajamas, his bare feet sinking into the thick carpet. In his hand was a worn toy airplane, its paint chipped with age. John's large eyes were vacant, as though staring through her rather than at her. Lena froze. Mrs. Harris's warning echoed in her mind. Do not engage with the boy. She gripped the cloth in her hand, torn between turning away or stepping closer. But the silence radiating from the child clenched her heart. Then the toy airplane slipped from John's hand, landing softly on the carpet. He did not bend to pick it up. He simply stared at it, face expressionless. Lena drew a deep breath. Slowly, she knelt down, retrieved the airplane, and rose to meet John's gaze at eye level. Resting the toy on her palm, she moved her fingers in a gesture long familiar to her, signing in ASL. Friend. Her voice was gentle. Did you know? In sign language, this is how we say friend. John stayed silent, but something flickered in his eyes. Slowly, clumsily, he lifted his small hand and mimicked the sign. Not perfect, but undeniably intentional. The moment made Lena's heart tremble. How long had it been since John responded to anyone? In the boy's eyes, she saw a fragile spark, a spark buried too long beneath his wall of silence. Just then, a sharp voice cut through the air. John, what are you doing here? Lena startled, turning to see Emily, John's nanny, standing in the hallway with a wary look. She hurried forward, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. You need to change clothes. Therapy starts in 15 minutes. Her gaze flicked toward Lena, suspicious. Who are you? The new housekeeper, Lena answered softly. Emily gave a curt nod, then led John away. The boy let himself be led away, without resistance, without emotion. But before leaving the room, he turned his head for one last look. Lena felt her heart tighten. That wasn't the gaze of a child. It was the gaze of someone who had seen too much, felt too much. In the hours that followed, she cleaned while slowly discovering the house. In the first-floor library, she found a photograph hidden between books. Ethan, Emma, and John laughing together at the beach. The boy in the picture, bright eyes, wide smile, looked like a completely different person from the child she had just met. By late afternoon, while tidying Ethan's study, he returned. Lena heard the front door open and voices in the hall. No progress? Ethan's voice was tense. No, sir, Emily replied. The therapist says we need patience. Patience, he repeated with a bitter laugh. For 6 months, that's all I've heard. Lena kept cleaning, trying not to listen, though it was impossible not to feel the disappointment and pain in his tone. The office door opened, and Ethan stepped in, looking surprised to find her there. Sorry, Lena said quickly. I'm almost finished. He looked at her for a moment. He was taller than on television, broad-shouldered, carrying the weight of the world. Are you new? Yes, sir. He nodded absently, setting his briefcase on the desk. Did Mrs. Harris explain the rules? Yes, absolute discretion, and never approach your son. Ethan's tired yet sharp eyes fixed on her. Nothing personal. We only want to protect him. I completely understand. Something in her answer made him observe her more closely. Do you have children? The question caught Lena off guard. Her throat tightened. I had a daughter. She's gone now. Ethan's face softened for an instant, a flicker of empathy passing between them, a shared understanding of the deepest loss. I'm very sorry, he said, and it sounded genuine. So am I, Lena whispered, gathering her things. Excuse me. As she stepped out of the study, Her heart raced, not only because she had just revealed that truth, but because, in that brief moment, she had seen through the shell of the desperate millionaire and glimpsed a broken father trying to mend the impossible. And more than anything else, that convinced her she had come to the right place. In the days that followed, Lena tried to keep her distance from John as instructed. She quietly went about her work, cleaning the lavish yet empty rooms. Yet every so often she would notice John appear somewhere, silent, like a small shadow. He would stand in a doorway or sit in a far corner, simply watching. And Lena, though pretending not to notice, always felt his gaze. One morning, while tidying John's room during his therapy session, an idea struck her. She pulled a scrap of paper and a pencil from her bag and quickly sketched a simple drawing, the hand sign for Friend in ASL. Heart racing as though she were breaking a rule, she slipped the paper beneath his pillow. The next day, when she returned, the paper had been neatly folded and placed on the desk. On it, beside her drawing, was a child's crude sketch of a tiny airplane flying among clouds. The lines were shaky, but it was enough to make Lena's heart leap. John had answered. From that day, a secret thread connected them. Lena began leaving small notes with basic signs. Water, thank you, toy. In return, John left little drawings or attempted to write a few letters. It was not conversation in words, but it was a hidden bridge, where silence was replaced with gestures and pictures. Then one day, as Lena vacuumed the hallway, John appeared quietly behind her. In his hand was the paper she had left the day before, showing the sign for sad. He didn't speak. He only held up the page, then pointed to the photo of his mother hanging in the bedroom. A lump rose in Lena's throat. She knelt to meet his eyes, gently repeating the sign for sad with her hands. Then she placed a palm over her chest and whispered, "I'm sad too, very much." John stared at her for a long moment. His eyes were still clouded, but in that instant, Lena saw something. The boy was learning to hand the world a fragment of his soul, however small. From then on, those papers and signs became their shared secret. They traded silent words, unspoken feelings. And every time Lena watched John mimic a new sign, she felt as though she were seeing Isabella's smile again, a smile she had believed was lost forever. One late afternoon, as crimson sunset poured through the tall glass windows, Lena found herself once again in John's company. He sat on the floor, clutching his worn wooden airplane, his eyes distant. Lena settled a short distance away, not intruding, and slowly pulled something from her bag, a small object wrapped in cloth. It was an old silver necklace with a tiny angel pendant. She turned it gently in her palm, her voice low and soft. "John, I want to show you something. When my daughter Isabella was alive, I used to wear this. After she passed, whenever I missed her, I would hold it and whisper a few words, as if I were still talking to her." She held the pendant out before him. "You can try it if you like. It helps you feel connected, even if only in your heart." John stared at it. His gaze wavered, then slowly he reached out. He clutched the pendant in his small hand, closed his eyes. Seconds passed, then a minute. His shoulders trembled. And then, the first tears spilled down his cheeks. Lena froze. For 6 months, John had not cried, not shown a single emotion. Now, the dam burst in ragged sobs. Without thinking, Lena opened her arms. John collapsed against her, his small body trembling in the embrace of a stranger who understood. She held him close, whispering into his hair, "It's all right, sweetheart. Let it out." Crying is also a way to speak. John's shoulders shook violently, his tears soaking through Lena's blouse. She wept too, for him and for Isabella. In that moment, 2 grieving souls found comfort in each other. Half a world away, in a London hotel room, Ethan opened his tablet to check the home security cameras. He often did this on business trips just to see that John was safe. But this time, the footage left him breathless. At this hour, he would usually find his son in the room, either playing alone or asleep. But the room was empty. Worried, Ethan switched through the cameras until he saw John in the garden with Lena. He turned up the sound, zoomed in. Curious. The sight stole his breath. John and Lena sat on the grass, their hands moving in rhythm, a flowing conversation. John responded quickly, his eyes alive, his face expressive. After a while, Ethan saw Lena hand something to John, a small necklace. The boy clutched it tightly, closed his eyes, then burst into tears. Ethan nearly dropped the tablet. His son, the boy who hadn't shown emotion in 6 months, was sobbing uncontrollably, and then did something even more astonishing. He wrapped his arms around Lena as if clinging to life itself. With trembling hands, Ethan zoomed in further to be sure he wasn't mistaken. Yes, it was John, his son, showing emotion, communicating, coming alive again. For a long beat, Ethan simply watched, the hotel room shrinking to a hush around him. When the tears subsided, Ethan saw John begin to sign rapidly. The pen slipped from Ethan's hand. His throat tightened. His eyes stung with tears. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps John was finding his way back. The moment his business trip ended, Ethan changed his ticket to return to New York earlier than planned. As soon as the plane landed, he headed straight for the penthouse. That night, the city lights glittered, but in his heart, there was only one urgency: to see John with his own eyes. Entering the home, Ethan passed Mrs. Harris directing the staff to prepare dinner. He nodded, but his gaze went straight down the hallway. And there, he saw John. The boy sat on the living room rug, stacking wooden blocks. Beside him, Lena sat cross-legged, saying nothing, simply watching him with gentle eyes. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. The image of John crying in Lena's arms on the camera footage still haunted him. Now he needed answers. "Lena!" His voice broke the silence, low but firm. She startled, rising quickly. "Mr. Caldwell, we need to talk, alone." He gestured, leading her into his office. The door shut. The room grew heavy. Ethan leaned against his desk, fixing his eyes on her. "I saw it," he began. "The camera in the garden. John cried. For the first time in months." Lena's hands clasped tightly before her chest, silent. "What did you do to my son?" The question was sharp, yet in his tone trembled not only suspicion, but also fragile hope. Lena drew in a steadying breath. This was the moment she could not avoid. "I didn't harm him. I only gave John another way to say what he couldn't with words." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Another way?" "Sign language," Lena admitted. "I used to be an ASL teacher. Before," her voice faltered, "before my daughter, Isabella, died of heart disease. I lost everything, my work, my faith, but I never forgot how hands can speak." Silence. Ethan looked up as though the air had been sucked from the room. "Your daughter had a heart condition too?" "Yes, a rare one, the same kind that took your wife, isn't it?" Emma's name rose unspoken in Ethan's mind, tightening his chest. He sank into a chair, rubbing his forehead. The painful coincidence felt like an invisible thread binding them. "So you were the one teaching John those signs?" "Yes," Lena said softly. "Not to defy you, but to help him. You may not believe me, but the first time John mimicked a sign, his eyes lit up. I knew. It was his way back to the world." Ethan remained silent, torn between the duty of a father and a gratitude he could no longer deny. He had spent millions on specialists, yet it was this unassuming woman who touched his son's heart. At last he spoke, his voice husky. "You will continue, not only with John. I want to learn too. If that is my son's language, then I must know how to speak it with him." Tears brimmed in Lena's eyes. In that moment, she understood. This father, wealthy, powerful, and admired, was, at his core, just a man pleading for a chance to understand his child. From that day forward, a new routine took root in the Caldwell penthouse. Every morning, as sunlight skimmed the Manhattan skyline, Lena sat across from Ethan in his spacious office, teaching him the basic signs of ASL. At first, Ethan was clumsy, his fingers stiff, his movements awkward. He fumbled, sometimes even laughing at himself in embarrassment. But within days, Lena noticed a change in his eyes, the patience and determination of a father. Ethan repeated each sign over and over until he mastered it, as though it were the most important task of his life. "This is Dad," Lena said, lifting her hands to demonstrate. Ethan copied, still unsure. "Like this?" "Yes, that's right. Very good." He nodded, lips pressed tight, as if promising himself, "I will learn this. I must." In the afternoons, Lena spent time with John. In the sunlit playroom, they sat on the rug, surrounded by papers, crayons, and gestures. John absorbed signs with astonishing speed. He learned water, thank you, toy in just a few days. But what moved Lena most was when she introduced emotions. "Happy," she signed, adding a gentle smile. John watched, then mirrored the motion. Then he hesitated, pointed to the photo of his mother on the desk, and signed, "Sad." Lena's throat tightened. She nodded, repeating the sign. "I'm sad too." Step by step, John began to share his inner world through his small hands. He signed afraid when thunder cracked outside the window, miss when he clutched his worn airplane. What had once been buried in silence now had a way out. Ethan often stood quietly in the doorway, watching. He saw his son's tiny hands move, his eyes alive in a way they hadn't been for months. Every sign John learned was a victory. Yet in his heart, pain lingered, for it was not spoken words, but another language. One evening, Ethan confided to Lena as they sat in the stillness of the living room. "I want to hear his voice. I want to hear him call me Dad, like before." Lena nodded gently. "I understand, but remember, this may be the first step. John needs to feel safe in communication before he can reclaim his voice." Ethan looked at her, his gaze filled with tangled emotions, hope, fear, and a fragile trust in this new path. Days passed, lessons continued. John began to tell stories with his hands, signing dream, sky, then adding little drawings to complete the picture. Once he signed Mom, pressed a hand to his chest, his lips moving silently without sound. Ethan stood behind him, eyes glistening. Lena touched his arm softly. "You see? John is finding his way back." And for the first time, Ethan allowed himself a true smile. That afternoon, the sky was covered with a pale gray veil. Lena sat on the playroom rug across from John. In her hand was a new sheet of paper, showing the sign for Dad. "Would you like to try?" she asked softly, moving her hands slowly. John stared intently. He lifted his small hands, mimicking each gesture. Though imperfect, his eyes shone with light. Then he turned his head toward the doorway. Ethan stood there. He had come home earlier than usual, still in his suit jacket. He froze at the sight. Lena smiled gently. "Do you want to show your dad?" John swallowed. His fingers trembled as he raised his hands again, signing Dad. Ethan stepped forward, kneeling to meet his son's eyes. He responded with steady hands, signing, "Son." John's eyes widened. Something inside him, some wall long held in place, suddenly crumbled. His lips quivered, and then a rough, halting sound broke the silence. "Dad!" The room fell utterly still. Ethan froze, tears brimming. "Say it again," he whispered, voice shaking. John drew a deep breath, eyes wet with tears. "Dad, The voice was fragile but real. Then, as though a door had swung wide open, he choked out 3 more words. "I love you." Ethan broke. He pulled his son into his arms, burying his face in the boy's soft hair. "I love you too. So much, so much." John clung to his father's shirt, sobs breaking between the fragile words. 6 months of silence shattered by the simplest phrases, yet more precious than any fortune Ethan had ever possessed. Lena sat quietly to the side, a hand pressed to her mouth to hold back tears. She knew she was witnessing a miracle, not one of wealth or medicine, but of connection, of love and understanding. Ethan lifted his gaze to her, voice choked. "Stay, please stay. My son and I, we need you." Lena nodded, speechless. In that moment, she knew she had found the family her heart thought it had lost forever. 3 months had passed since the day John spoke "Dad" again. The atmosphere in the Caldwell penthouse was no longer the same. The heavy silence had vanished, replaced by laughter and conversation, sometimes spoken, sometimes signed. Every morning, Ethan and Lena continued their ASL lessons together. At first, it had been simply about helping him understand his son, but over time, those sessions became moments of connection. They shared not only hand gestures, but also stories of their lives, past pains, and dreams that had yet to take shape. In the afternoons, Lena spent hours with John. The boy now not only signed, but also practiced speaking, word by word, short phrase by short phrase. Each time he managed a new word, his face lit up, and Ethan's eyes welled with tears, as though gifted something beyond price. One afternoon, the 3 of them sat together in the garden. John signed family, then looked at them both and smiled. The moment struck Ethan silent. He turned to Lena and caught her gaze. In her eyes, he saw both the shadow of past sorrow and the glimmer of new hope. One evening, after putting John to bed, Ethan invited Lena into his office. The room glowed warmly in golden light, no longer the heavy place it had once been. From a drawer, he pulled out an old frame, the printed declaration he had once given the press. "I will marry whoever makes my son speak again." He placed it on the desk, looking directly at her. "That day, I was just a desperate father. I turned my grief into a reckless promise. Tonight, I want to end it." Slowly, he tore the paper in the frame into pieces. Lena watched, her throat tight. "No contracts, no conditions," Ethan continued. "If there is something between us, it must be real, not a reward for sacrifice." Lena fell silent. For months she had wrestled with her emotions. Her heart, once shattered by loss, had been afraid to open again. But now, looking at Ethan, not as the powerful millionaire, but as a man learning to be a father again, she knew her answer. "Ethan," she whispered, "I'm not here for money. I stayed for John, and maybe for you too." He stepped closer, eyes glistening. "Then give me a chance, not to replace the past, but to build a new beginning together." In that moment, under the soft golden glow, 2 broken hearts found each other. Outside, John slept peacefully, clutching his wooden airplane and the angel pendant, symbols of loss, yet reminders that love can take root even in ashes. A new chapter began, not bound by a desperate vow, but by the free will of 2 hearts that had finally found their way home. One weekend morning, sunlight poured through the Caldwell penthouse. John ran across the garden, laughter ringing, clear and bright, a sound Ethan once thought he would never hear again. Lena followed behind, smiling, signing "careful" in ASL. Ethan stood at a distance, arms folded, his eyes fixed on them. The sight filled him with a sudden lightness. This home was alive again. After lunch, the 3 of them gathered at the drawing table. John scribbled eagerly with crayons, his small hands alternating between sketching and signing for Lena to explain. When the drawing was finished, he held it up proudly. 3 figures holding hands, a man, a woman, and a child. Above them, two winged figures, a woman and a little girl, smiling down from the sky. "Family," John said softly, this time with both voice and sign. Tears brimmed in Ethan's eyes. He wrapped his arms around his son and Lena. Yes, family. That night, after John was asleep, Lena and Ethan sat on the balcony beneath a sky full of stars. For a long time, neither spoke, only the distant hum of the city filling the silence. At last, Ethan reached for her hand. "I know I can't erase the past," he said slowly. "Emma will always be part of my heart. But with you and John, we can write new chapters, not replacing, continuing." Lena nodded, her eyes glistening. "Me too. Isabella will always be with me. But here, with you and John, I found something I thought was lost. Family." They sat quietly, hand in hand. Behind the balcony doors, John slept peacefully, clutching his wooden airplane and the angel pendant. In his dreams, perhaps, he saw his mother and Isabella smiling, content that they had found each other. A new family had been born, not through some distant miracle, but through love, patience, and the belief that from ruin, life can bloom again. A year passed faster than anyone expected. The Caldwell penthouse was no longer silent and cold, but filled with laughter and the familiar rhythm of hand signs. John had made incredible progress. He now communicated fluently in ASL and even spoke in sentences, his voice still shaky but full of determination. On the exact anniversary of the day John first called Dad again, Ethan prepared a surprise. He arranged a day trip for the three of them to a vast rose garden in the countryside. That afternoon, as golden sunlight spilled across the fields, Ethan took Lena's hand and led her to a clearing in the garden. John ran ahead, laughing, signing flower to his mother Lena. Ethan turned back, locking eyes with her. In that moment, he was no longer the powerful millionaire, but simply a man trembling before the woman who had healed his heart and his son's. "Lena," he said softly, kneeling on the grass. In his hand was a velvet box, inside a gleaming ring. "1 year ago, you helped my son find his voice again, but more than that, you gave us a family. I don't want to see you as a guest or an employee in this house anymore. I want to see you as my partner for the rest of my life." Tears welled in Lena's eyes, her hand covering her mouth. Behind them, John's eyes sparkled as he signed and said aloud, "Say yes, Mom." Through her tears, Lena laughed. She nodded firmly. "Yes, I will." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, while John cheered and ran circles around them. Months later, the wedding took place in a small garden, surrounded only by their closest loved ones. John walked down the flower path holding his wooden airplane, a little witness to the day's joy. When Ethan and Lena exchanged vows, John stood beside them, signing family and saying loud and clear, "We are family forever." Applause erupted, tears mixed with smiles. In that moment, the shadows of loss faded away, leaving only the warmth of the present and the brightness of a future. A new family had truly been born, not from despair, but from love, hope, and the patience that never gave up.